On Nation to Nation, a climate change activist shares the outcome of a new report, Decolonizing Climate Policy in Canada.
And the results are very clear and tend to be about the same, is that climate change is happening now and it's happening to Indigenous communities first.
Millbrook First Nation Chief Bob Glode gives the lowdown on the impact First Nations have on the economy in Atlantic Canada. It smashes the old stereotypes.
The contributions from First Nations communities has been significantly increasing year over year.
A new single highlights the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
The whole goal of this song was to, spread awareness, to remind people, like the song, its title in itself is like, where is everyone?
Honey, and welcome to Nation to Nation. I'm Annette Francis. COP28 wrapped up this week in Dubai. Over 85,000 people participated in the two-week environmental conference, including Indigenous peoples from across the world. JC Chiblo is a Anishinaabe from Garden River First Nation in Ontario and the manager of education and training at Indigenous Climate Action. She was involved in that organization's latest report, Decolonizing Climate Policy in Canada. Chiblo helped to present at COP.
Real solutions reduce greenhouse gases at the source and do not rely on market-based mechanisms and non-market-based mechanisms. Climate policies like we're seeing today at the UNFCCC continue to be led by wealthy and influential forces that cause the very problems that we are in today. State and non-state actors ought to act with humility and practice honesty regarding climate solutions and be held accountable through justice mechanisms defined and led by Indigenous peoples.
JC Chiblo joins us now. Welcome to Nation.
Thank you for having me.
So the report identifies some of the direct impacts of climate change in various Indigenous communities. Can you describe some of the changes happening?
Sure. So we've conducted interviews with people from all across so-called Canada, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and the results are very clear and tend to be about the same, is that climate change is happening now and it's happening to Indigenous communities first. We tend to be the first impacted and the worst impacted, but yet we contribute the least to climate change. So it's actually really important to ensure that our voices are held at the center of when we're decolonizing climate policy, as we're the first and we know the best about what's happening in our territories.
What are some of the Indigenous-led solutions to restoration from climate change?
Oh, there's so many, and I think that the report does a really great job of explaining some of those. But for restoration, there's tons of projects happening throughout so-called Canada, including river restoration projects, tree restoration projects, along with the transition to renewable energies. So a lot of nations are now looking to green technologies to try and reduce their carbon footprint.
How can climate policy be decolonized?
It's a very big question and one that we're looking to explore. So right now the report kind of just looks at a couple key things, such as the climate impacts, so identifying priorities for Indigenous communities, and then how settler climate policy is actually holding up colonialism still today. And then the last piece is identifying and addressing barriers to Indigenous-led climate policy. So until we're able to identify what those barriers are and work through them, we will not be able to decolonize any kind of policy moving forward.
How do Indigenous climate priorities from Canada compare to those from other Indigenous nations across the globe?
I would say that we have some similar priorities. There is an Indigenous Peoples Caucus that happens at the UNFCCC. And that caucus tends to be aligned on a lot of things. We know that Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous rights have the solutions to climate change. And we also know that a lot of the times, though, that knowledge and those rights aren't fully addressed or adequately implemented or respected when it comes to settler colonial climate policies and policies in general.
So what was the response to your report at COP?
A lot of positive feedback from Indigenous folks. That tended to be the group that we were presenting it to, as that's our target audience. We hope to, in the future, work alongside communities to develop their own climate policies and come up with a framework or a toolkit that supports communities to do that work on their own. So at Indigenous Climate Action, we truly believe in self-determination and allowing folks to determine, the nations to determine what works best for them. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach that we can really do here. As we all know, our nations vary so much depending on the region. So we really need to, focus on that and allow communities to determine what makes sense for them, what works and what doesn't, whether that is climate policies or whether that's the kinds of solutions that they're enacting on their territories.
What do you think of the final statement put out at COP about transitioning away from fossil fuels?
It's a very exciting time. This Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC is the first time that they announced or included the wording or the language of needing to phase down fossil fuels or phase away or move away from fossil fuels. Although I strongly believe that isn't enough, I think we need to actually phase out fossil fuels. And one of the ways that we do that is through an Indigenous-led just transition. And the reason why I distinctly say Indigenous-led is because we tend to have those solutions and that relationship to the land that can help inform so that our solutions will last for generations. It's based on reciprocity. It's based on relationships to one another and with the land. So without an Indigenous-led just transition, it won't be a just transition that can last for 7 generations or 100 generations into the future. So although it's great to see some of this language being implemented at COP and implemented in so-called Canada, it's not enough and it needs to be Indigenous-led.
How much confidence do you put into an event like COP to do anything about climate change, considering the influence of what energy companies think is doable?
I think that's a really good point. And even just this year was the most attended by Indigenous peoples, this Conference of the Parties. However, that still meant that we were at a 7-to-1 ratio with oil and gas companies, executives. So although it really feels that Indigenous folks, it's great to see us there and doing our best to advocate for Indigenous rights and Indigenous solutions and human rights, some of the times it's at a standpoint against that many oil executives. So it's an uphill battle, but I feel like if we don't go, the conflation of Indigenous rights with local knowledge is going to continue to happen. And we need to really be there to ensure that we are upholding our sovereignty and communicating to the states that not only are we sovereign nations, but we are unique and inherent rights holders. And that's what sets us aside from so many other civil society organizations that attend and oil and gas executives.
Okay. Miigwech, thank you for this.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we'll talk to an Atlantic chief about First Nations contributions to the economy. That's coming up after the break. Anine, welcome back. The Atlantic Congress of First Nations Chief Secretariat has released an interim economic report. The study found that Indigenous business has a significant impact on local economy. The number of self-employed Indigenous people has grown at a faster rate than the non-Indigenous population. Chief Bob Glode made the announcement on Wednesday in Truro, Nova Scotia. According to the report, the Indigenous economy contributes billions to the Atlantic region and employs over 50,000 people. Anine, welcome to Nation, Chief Glode.
Good morning.
What was the biggest thing we should take away from Wednesday's unveiling of this interim report?
Well, from yesterday's announcement in regards to the biggest thing is the fact that First Nations communities contribute a significant amount of GDP to the local economy from Atlantic Canada. We're talking in excess of $5.6 billion of GDP that's generated from First Nations communities.
Should it be a surprise that First Nation communities add that amount of money to Atlantic Canada's GDP in 2020? Or actually, it was $3.6 billion in 2020.
Yeah, it was 3.6 billion, and going forward, those numbers have increased So that will be coming out in the next report. So the contributions from First Nations communities has been significantly increasing year over year, and that's just from the research that has been done to show that growth year over year from prior studies.
Will this report help to combat the stereotype that First Nations contribute nothing to the economy and are always looking for handouts?
Yeah, and that's the other messaging that's coming out of it. The other thing I want to mention is in regards to Millbrook First Nation, in regards to our community, in excess of between 72 to 75% of our annual revenue comes from our own source revenue from business that we have generated and relationships we have established within our community. These are numbers that are known by. I'm sorry. These are things that are not commonly known by society, and we just want to share that information and with the public and with the audience in regards to the value added from First Nations communities.
Why do you think this myth endures in Atlantic Canada?
It's just just stigmatism and just from being lack of knowledge and not knowing and understanding the value and contributions from First Nations communities over the years.
What are some of the projects that have driven economic growth in your region?
Well, in our region, one of the primary ones is you're looking at the fishing industry, and that's why I'm located right now at our fisheries office and with our team. Our fisheries is one of the main contributions to our local economy and our community. We have other areas as well. We have residential development, we have retail development, we have gaming, we have tobacco. But the primary thing is fishing contributions that our fishing industry contributes in our community, along with other First Nations communities in Atlantic Canada.
Well, what more would you like to see to ensure there are jobs and wealth for Millbrook?
Well, what we need to be able to do is looking at ways that we can be more fully integrated and looking at ways we can expand our existing businesses and opportunities. And that's one of the things that we're doing in one sector, and one sector in particular in fishing is looking towards being more fully integrated and having more diversification within it, as opposed to just having commercial fishing. We're looking at your moderate livelihood fishing. You're looking at having processing fish, various areas. Looking at being more hands-on, and that creates more opportunities for other sectors of that industry.
Earlier this week, you sent out a press release calling out the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for lack of transparency. What was its purpose?
The purpose is that during the Marshall decision since 1999, there's been a lack of engagement with First Nations communities and recognizing the rights of Indigenous people. And that's what we need to be able to focus on, the right to self-government, self-determination by First Nations communities. The other issue is addressing the issue with the unauthorized and illegal fishing that DFO particularly continue to keep identifying, and that's we need to be able to address that, and so that way our community members that want to be able to earn a moderate livelihood can go out and do so.
How seriously has this affected the way non-Indigenous perceive the Mi'kmaq's commercial fishery?
It has a significant. It's lateral violence at its finest when you're looking at it from the commercial side of it and how it addresses to Indigenous communities. Basically, it's a right. You're looking at a privilege-based industry, which is a commercial, versus a rights-based fishing, which is our First Nations right to fish for a moderate livelihood and fish for a living. That's the bottom line, is that it's a rights-based versus a privilege-based commercial fishing.
There's been a new federal fisheries minister for several months now. How would you rate her performance so far?
Well, we need to have more engagement. We need to be able to have more discussion so we can address some of these issues that we're currently facing, so we can move move this agenda along, so that way we can be more basically work more closely together, and to allow our fishers to have more access to different sectors of the fishing industry.
Okay. Miigwech, thank you, Chief Gloat.
Great, thank you.
Stay tuned. After the break, we'll hear a new debut single that draws attention to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Welcome back. For the past 30 years, Aboriginal Legal Services in Toronto has been supporting Indigenous people in providing advocacy, legal services, and culturally based alternatives in healing. This month, staff from ALS released their first single debut. It's the result of an innovative music therapy project in partnership with Make Music Matter. The song's subject matter is about murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Here's a sample of their work together in studio and the result of the collaboration.
It's all good till it ain't. Life was easy in the childhood days, but the small town thinking has it slipping away. Away she goes.
Krista Big Canoe is a member of the artist collective called Zundaye and the legal director of Aboriginal Legal Services. She joins me now. Welcome, Krista.
Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on the release of Where Is Everyone? What exactly is the song about?
Well, the song is actually, it's a duality. I mean, it's the loss of an Indigenous woman from her home and community, but it's also about the resilience of Indigenous women. So, I mean, it's a lived reality that we have as Indigenous women walking in this world. And so this is part of a project that is working on a healing and harmony model. And essentially, it's music therapy, and it's aimed at dealing with trauma. And so this was a number of women who came together and wrote a song. And I mean, it's a tragic song, but it's also a song of resilience. It's a song about remembering those we've lost and finding sort of like steady, fast need to call for action.
What did it take to put the song together, and what's it mean to be a part of it?
Well, it's really interesting because, as a legal director, I'm usually in places like courtrooms, hearings, or watching staff. So this project is a partnership with Make Music Matter. And essentially what we're doing is we're building our capacity so we could deliver through our victim service advocacy team, so we can deliver this service to the community who has experienced, as we know, far too often, trauma and intergenerational harm. And so it took a lot of work, actually, and it was really interesting because it puts you in odd places. Like, it puts you right into a studio with producers and like real live musicians. And we've had opportunities to meet with, for example, a punk rock group, Billy Talent, and we've been working with some really good producers. So it's a really neat space to be in. I'm very excited for our staff to go through this process so that we have the tools that we can then share with our community. Because if I think about how empowering I feel after this process, I can only hope it would be so effective to members of our community, particularly women, youth, two-spirited, transgender, gender fluid people.
How do programs like this help in healing?
Well, I mean, I think, by the time I'm a lawyer, and we have an entire legal service, and our staff is like 90% Indigenous, and we're all professionals. So we're at a point where we have a lot of well-educated people and we're doing a lot of good work. But I think this is interesting from our perspective because it takes us outside of sort of those legal realms or that other trauma-informed process we take, and it puts an individual right into a music therapy program. And it's amazing the types of topics and issues that you can broach without being hyper-triggered. Right? Like, I mean, I was the lead commission counsel in the National Inquiry, and we had health teams and elders, and you can ask anyone that attended that how triggering that process was for everyone, from the people sharing their stories through staff, through people just listening. And this gives us an opportunity to actually do things. And there's a lot of evidence that music and music therapy actually does help heal the brain. It does help with our mental wellness. And so I'm very excited to be doing this process with partners that care so much and to have lucky enough to have been received the funding, that we can actually offer this service in the future.
How many staff were involved?
So right now we have, well, it's open to staff. So in the first group, it was just a core group of leaders. So we have multidisciplinary team at Aboriginal Legal Services, which includes, social work background, people with therapy background, and a coordinator. So it was a very small group, but it was the leadership group who went through the first time, so that we can then train the rest of our staff. And so our next round has 10 additional staff plus some external people. And then probably the third round will have between 15 to 20 of our staff. And then at the last portion, we'll get to do 2 community workshops. So it will involve clients and youth and women who want to participate. And we'll do that in a process of referral, like internal referral, or from other service providers in Toronto who want to refer people to the program.
How long will that process take to get the next new single out?
Well, it's about 12 weeks of the actual music therapy component. And then there's some post-production stuff. So, sometimes it can go through fairly quickly, but we're taking this sort of step by step and making sure each group gets the time it requires. So it'll be a minimum of 12 weeks, but it may be, as much as 4 months for the post-production it to be polished and ready to share with the world.
Have you had a response from your first one?
Yes, and it's been positive, right? In terms of, I think it is a sad song, and obviously it's not for everyone. It's not we don't anticipate that it's going to hit the pop charts or anything. But the whole goal of this song was to, spread awareness, to remind people. The song, its title in itself is where is everyone? We as Indigenous women or Indigenous organizations that have been calling for justice for years, we're kind of at a point of feeling fed up. Where is everyone? Who cares? Why aren't they there? So we wanted that message to go out. So the feedback we've actually received, not surprisingly, has mostly been from Indigenous women, Indigenous organizations, and people who already care about the issue. So it would be our hope that it goes a little broader than that, but we'll see.
All right. Where can anyone interested find the song?
It's on every major platform, so you can get it from Spotify. You can go to either our website at Aboriginal Legal Services, where there's a link, or our partner, Make Music Matter. It's also, on iTunes. There's YouTube. It's amazing how technology lets it take off to wherever it wants to be.
Okay, miigwech.
Miigwech. Thanks for having me.
Next week, we'll bring you the final episode of Nation to Nation for 2023. One of the guests will be the NDP's Indigenous Affairs critic and MP for Nunavut, Laurie Idlut.
Whenever there are reports of homelessness, too many of them are either First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. When there are reports of health indicators, just for example, the Chief Public Health Officer in Nunavut recently announced that 5 people had died by tuberculosis in the last 2 years. So a lot of these underinvestments are seeping out into our health and social indicators, and we need to put a stop to that. We need to show true commitment to Indigenous peoples and reconciliation by giving them the investments that they need, regardless of what is going on in Canada's economy.
And if you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcast. Go to aptnnews.ca/podcast. Miigwech, and have a good night.